From wildfires to floods, or through slow, insidious environmental changes like insect incursions and mold, our changing climate can put historic and artistic works at risk and undermine sites that have stood for centuries or millennia in an instant. But our cultural inheritance also gives a love of place and heritage that spurs people to action. Conservators have a crucial part to play in the intersect between science, art, environment, and community. Conservators work in every environment across the planet and are witnesses to climate change, whether it's dealing with more unpredictable climates, like this Kushite archaeological site in the deserts of Sudan, and for those helping to keep safe and conserve so many iconic objects across the world, from the coat of General Suu Kyi in Myanmar to Tutankhamun's sash in the Egypt Museum, Cairo. Here, issues from dust and mold to flooding of whole collections are far more of an issue than a few years ago. Conservators can be found everywhere, even in Antarctica at the foot of Mount Erebus. Here I am on an expedition to conserve Scott's Hut, a site which is highly vulnerable to the warming temperatures of the polar regions. Art and heritage conservators are therefore involved in one of the most varied and passionate professions committed to conserving cultural heritage. This might range from weeks of detailed preservation work on a single artwork in a museum or laboratory, to caring for iconic heritage sites that have been part of our landscape for millennia. As we face our greatest challenge, it's useful to look back to our roots 70 years ago. Instituted in 1950, many of ISC's founders had first-hand experience of preserving the world's cultural heritage in extreme situations during the Second World War. American George Steit was among the famous monuments men who recovered thousands of works of art hidden in locations from salt mines to churches across Europe. Post-war, joined by pioneering women including Evelyn Ehrlich, Mina Horowitz and Madeleine Aars, they created the modern conservation profession, bridging the gap between the arts and sciences and combining technical expertise with a deep knowledge of art and heritage. We draw inspiration from that past as we address what dramatic climate change means in practice for collections, sites, and artifacts across the world. The City Palace Museum, Udaipur, is based in a huge former 16th century palace in the desert state of Rajasthan, India. As Anuja Mukherjee describes, it was artfully built to withstand desert heat long before the era of air conditioning.
The architectural development of the palace over the years also observed certain essential features, such as open courtyard spaces, windows with jalis or lattice work in narrow corridors and stairways, as well as in living spaces, openings in opposite walls of rooms, and jharokas or balconies with openings on three sides to ensure good ventilation.
Now, however, the site is a serious threat from mold and damp, as the climate has fluctuated from its normal patterns.
Consecutive years have seen massive changes in the quantity of rainfall. While 2020 saw a significant deficit from past years, in 2021, Udaipur was hit by cyclonic storms. It is commonly understood that rainfall affects ecology and livelihoods, but its impact on the cultural heritage is not small.
No longer naturally stable and in harmony with its surrounding ecosystem, this huge building and its collections need new interventions from conservators to keep it safe. You might think that stored securely within the collections of great museums, climate change could not reach the iconic objects that are inherited from past civilizations. But these too face challenge. This 3,000-year-old sash of Tutankhamun is held at the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, and was cared for many years by Hannah El-Goudi, who conserved it despite few climate controls.
Actually, I love Cairo Egyptian Museum very much and have worked there for 20 years as a textile conservator since I was graduated from the conservation department at the College of Archaeology from Cairo University. Unfortunately, it has few climate controls. This makes very old fragile textile objects like Tutankhamun's sash very vulnerable. I conserved it in 2016 and had to deal with dirt and dust, which covered the entire object, on and between the fibers and the attachment tasseled frames. Also, I modified the old displaying vessel. Some parts of the fabric easily turned to powder even touched, and if not properly cared for. This sash is a clear example of the effect of a changing and uncontrolled environment on the museum collections, such as uncontrolled temperature, light, and air pollution.
In Germany, the threat to collections comes not so much from dust or insects, but from floods. This Eiffel landscape painting is encased in silt and mud after the nearby Ahr River broke its banks and water penetrated the Bad Neuenahr Ahrweiler City Museum. It was among many objects in a storage room which was submerged for 3 days. We here see flood damage to cultural heritage from across Germany. Populations and communities along the Ahr have historically been relatively resilient to riverine flooding. The damage now is because once-in-a-century flood events are taking place 3 or 4 years apart. Water is also among the issues in the UK, where English Heritage cares for hundreds of iconic sites.
One of our biggest challenges is Hurst Castle on the south coast. It's a fantastic 16th century Henry VIII period fort which extends out into Solent, and we're seeing quite a lot of coastal erosion there at the moment. We're starting to see some impact of climate change. The biggest risk areas around our coastlines, but we're also seeing impacts in our gardens, and we're seeing impact in terms of rainfall. This is something that is starting to happen now. It's not just looking to happen in the future.
What is the conservation profession doing in the face of these threats, which can so easily reach into art collections, threaten palaces, and destroy whole towns? Part of the solution is to act more locally and sustainably, and combine the knowledge of local communities and preservation techniques of the past with the technology of the present. The San Xavier mission is the oldest European structure in Arizona, and still serves the Tohono O'odham community. Its current conservation projects aim for greater involvement of local people in conservation, including village apprentices to help preserve the building in a brutal desert environment without climate control, as well as the use of more sustainable practices and extensive experimental environmental monitoring, including sampling for microbial diversity. A similar philosophy is shaping conservation in Indonesia, where Saiful Bakari is using local technology to deal with destruction driven by humidity.
In tropical country like Indonesia, my home, 70 until 90% humidity means that most of the country's cultural heritage is at risk from biodeterioration, with stonework eaten away over time by mosquitoes and lichens. Over the last few decades, it was addressed by a mixture of chemicals. Recent conservation research has revealed that stonework can be safely and effectively treated by locally produced citronella oil, where the knowledge is coming from traditional custodians.
The Palace of Udaipur is also beginning to find solutions to stabilize the building, but without using modern air conditioning that would rely on fossil fuels and contribute to the cycle of destruction. Instead, the solution benefited from the constant temperature already provided by the thick, lime-plastered walls acting as a good insulator, while fluctuations in humidity are addressed by modern technology in the shape of customized ventilation systems. But in addition to creating a more local, innovative and balanced approach to conservation, we also know that we have to address our own emissions and negative environmental impacts, from energy to travel to single-use plastics and waste, and how we buy and use resources. Glasgow Museums is looking again at everything from its use of bubble wrap to addressing growing insect populations.
We wage war on shadow gaps and void spaces where dust can accumulate, because they can provide a food source for species such as the common clothes moth.
In Bilbao, Aitziber Velasco describes how new plans for the care of Puppy, a giant dog made of flowers in 1992 by American artist Jeff Koons, will reduce water use.
The fact that we will know the amount of water coming from the rainfall will allow us to decide whether we want to reprogram the watering or even cancel it. And this will result in cost savings, efficiency, responsible use of natural resources, and this will be a great step forward in sustainability.
Retrofitting heritage buildings with innovations from solar to smart meters is also going to be crucial. Back in 2020, before the pandemic took hold globally, our last in-person event was held at the Smithsonian. It was called Stemming the Tide: Global Strategies for Sustaining Cultural Heritage Through Climate Change. We heard from archaeologists, biologists, ecologists, and indigenous leaders.
Nothing is stable. Forest ecosystems that always appeared to be stable are now very unstable.
As these erosional processes continue, sites are washing out to sea every day, faster than anyone anticipated, and faster than research can occur. A parallel problem to this is that funding is required to intervene, either excavating or to recover the contexts before they are completely gone, or using technology or to digitally collect the data before it's lost. However, the process of applying for funding can take multiple years. So it has not caught up with the urgency of climate change. By now, many of the sites are gone, and we might never know how much we lost because we didn't know how much we had to begin with.
We heard from Isabel Rivera Calazzo of archaeological sites, which we always thought would be there forever, collapsing. And we know from the people of Tuvalu, whose land is subsiding underneath the waves of the Pacific, who say they can no longer read the skies or the seas in terms of what that tells them. Everyone has a part to play. We all need to find our voice, whether it is personally or institutionally. Secondly, we need to bridge the gap between concern and engagement. And thirdly, we need to be flexible and adaptable. To address the climate crisis, we know that conservators need to combine small local actions with substantial global action. IIC has committed to reach net zero carbon in its own work by 2030. We've also released a groundbreaking joint commitment with two other great conservation bodies, ICOMCC and ICROM, to work together on solutions.
Heritage is a powerful tool, but a fragile one. Let's embark on this journey of commitment together.
Our actions have impact and consequence. Together, as a professional body, we can make change. Change is needed to combat and mitigate the current climate crisis that we are all facing.
Since our earliest days working internationally and facing seemingly insurmountable problems have been at the core of our identity. It's now the turn of this generation of conservators to act.